So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. This is our Learn to Play series, and today we are finally going to make a character. You've all been asking for it, and we are going to do that today, step by step. You're going to need two things today to get started. Both of them are free. One is a character sheet. The second are the basic rules for Dungeons and Dragons. Now, both of these things you can get the links for. We'll also mention if you do have the player's handbook where you can actually find those things in the player's handbook. But we're going to walk through step by step. If you haven't seen our previous videos, now is the time to do that. We talk about ability score generation. We're not going to talk about that in depth today. We talk about character choice and why we're choosing the different things that we're choosing. That is not going to be what we're talking about today. Today, we're going to actually build the character.
So I wanted to start off by mentioning a few things. One, our GM, and usually you're the person that's game mastering your game will tell you this information, has told us that we're going to use the standard array. Like Tim mentioned, we talk about the different stat styles in a previous video, but we have a set of numbers that we're going to choose and put into our 6 stats. The other thing is, both for brevity in the video and so that it's a little easier on us, we've made some decisions beforehand about what we're going to pick. We are picking a Dwarf Fighter because we know that this works mechanically and we've done it before and it's in the basic rules. There are a lot of reasons. The important thing is you can make some of these decisions beforehand. You can also follow us and make the decisions as you go. It doesn't actually matter. This will make a slightly better mechanically character, technically, but it's not so important in D&D that if you choose your race and class as you're going and don't have that in mind beforehand, that would really matter all that much.
All right, so I want to explicitly show you where to find the information that we talked about and that James is talking about if you're using the basic rules. So where do you find the stuff that affects the core mechanic? Well, I'm looking here. This is the D&D basic rules. We downloaded it. So essentially what you're going to do, if you go to your basic rules, you just scroll down here. It's hyperlinked. You go to your races. So I'm going to go to one of the races, Dwarf. Okay. Now, what you're going to find is it gives you a bunch of cool like narrative stuff, but under Dwarf Traits, this is what you're looking for, Dwarf Traits. And every single race has this. You're going to see ability score increase. Your constitution score increases by 2. Every race underneath their traits is going to tell you what the ability score increase is. Okay. Now, on the same page here, Mountain Dwarf is what we're choosing because it gives you another ability score increase. This increases your strength by 2. Every sub-race is going to tell you where the ability score increases. All right? Now, switching here to the fighter, okay? The fighter and all other classes will have what's called a quick build, and it tells you explicitly what you need to focus on for your ability scores. So as an example here, you want to make your strength or dexterity your highest ability score, depending on whether you want to focus on melee weapons, which is strength, or archery or finesse weapons, which is dexterity. Your next highest score should be constitution. Okay? These things this is the homework that you need to have done already, unless you don't care about that stuff. If you don't care about maximizing your character mechanically, you can just ignore all that stuff and play it as it goes. But so you know how we got to this choice, that's how we got to this choice. We know a dwarf, mountain dwarf, fighter is going to need strength. It's going to need dexterity or strength or dexterity and constitution, and the dwarf is the total package there. So that's how we got there. Let's jump in and assign some ability scores.
So getting into ability scores here, we're as James mentioned, we're going to be using the standard array, which we explain exactly what the standard array is in our ability scores video, but just as a quick refresher, we're going to be assigning a 15, a 14, a 13, a 12, a 10, and an 8 across our 6 ability score attributes. So knowing that we're going to be a mountain dwarf, and particularly a fighter, that gives me a strong sense of where we should be leaning. I know the mountain dwarf gets a strength to... I know the mountain dwarf gets a bonus to strength, so I'm guessing that our fighter is probably going to be strength-focused and not dexterity-focused. For me, I tend to be the sort of player who likes to maximize their character's mechanical effectiveness. That's just the way that I enjoy the game. So that's going to be kind of where I'm leaning. So we'll just start putting these ability scores in the different boxes that we think will best suit what the character we want to play is. So I'm going to be taking that 15, that highest number, and I'm going to be putting that right into strength. As a fighter, strength is sort of your bread and butter attribute. That's how you do damage, that's how you attack, that's how you use a lot of your physical ability. So strength is super important, so I want that to be the highest. I'm going to take the 14, I'm going to put that in constitution, so skipping down an attribute there. HP is super important as a fighter too, and that's what Constitution gives you. So I want to make sure that if I'm going to be in there fighting with melee weapons using that strength, that I'll also be able to take some hits back, and Constitution will help me do that. I'm going to be taking that 13, I'm going to be putting it into Wisdom. Wisdom is just generally fairly useful. It gives you a lot of, perception and sort of general skill use. It might come in handy. And I think it kind of fits with a lot of, at least going off of generic D&D, settings, dwarves and wisdom are kind of tied together a lot too. So it seems fitting to me. I'll take the 12, put that back up in dexterity. It's just a useful skill to have as far as avoiding a lot of threats and things like that. I'll take the 10 and put it into charisma. And then I'll take the 8 and I'm going to put it into intelligence. So that'll be our low stat for this character. Now, you'll notice that this is just the standard array numbers, and as Tim mentioned before, all these races and everything that we pick give bonuses to these attributes, so now I'm going to add those in as well. So, as a dwarf, we'll get +2 to Constitution, so that'll bump our 14 up to a 16. And then as a mountain dwarf subrace that we picked, that'll give us +2 to Strength, which then will bump that 15 up to a 17. Which will end up being important in a little bit once we get into the modifiers that these attributes all relate to. So the next step is then going to be determining what modifiers all these ability scores get us, because the modifiers will actually affect the die rolls that we make in the game. So that's kind of the more important final number to have on hand as far as actually playing the game. So there's a chart, which will be up on the screen here, that will tell you what ability score gets you what modifier. So we can see ability scores between 16 and 17 will get you a +3 modifier. So that'll be our strength and constitution will both have +3s. Ability scores 12 and 13 get you a +1 modifier. So those will both have +1. That's dexterity and our wisdom. Our charisma is a 10, which gets us a flat 0 modifier. No plus or minus there. And then our intelligence will be our lowered stat, which will have a -1. And we can see we have all those modifiers, so that way when we roll any d20 check that'll call for that attribute, you just check what that modifier number is, you add it or subtract it to the die roll accordingly, and you go on. So that'll be our ability scores set up for our Dwarf Fighter.
So one quick thing is that you can decide to put the modifier or the ability score in either place. So you notice how I have the 17 up top here and the +3 at the bottom. Whatever works better for you. Some people actually prefer to put the +3 at the top and the 17 at the bottom. It's whatever works better for you.
All right, so now that we have decided what we're playing, we have a dwarf. We've talked about the ability score increases that comes with, but in the dwarf section, there are a lot of other traits that dwarves get. The important thing is some of these are decided in this section and some of them are not, but they're all listed here. So I'm going to go through them all, but some of them we will sort of be deciding on now, and some we're kind of not worrying about right now because they're not for this point, if that makes sense. So we've already talked about the Dwarven ability score increase, and we've added that to our Constitution. Age is one that you can kind of decide where you want to land here. It's more of a lore thing. It doesn't really have a mechanical advantage or disadvantage. Alignment isn't actually decided by whether or not you're a dwarf. So you'll see that section there, but this is more just a lore thing to, if you want an idea of making one in the Wizards of the Coast world, That's kind of how they see it, but it'll depend on the world you're playing in. There's size, which the mechanical thing you need to know is that your size is medium, but you can decide your dwarf stands this big or is this many pounds, but overall medium is the important thing you're looking for. The base walking speed of a dwarf is 25 feet, and your speed is not reduced by wearing heavy armor. This section also lets you know if you have dark vision or not, and the dwarf does have dark vision. They can see in dark and dim conditions. Dwarves get something called Dwarven Resilience, where they get advantage on saving throws against poison. They also have special combat training. This section is often called something special, but it tells you what things you have proficiency with. So dwarves have a battle axe, a hand axe, light hammer, and war hammer. Those are the weapons they're proficient with. You get a choice of your tool proficiency. You gain proficiency with the artisan tools of your choice between smith's tools, brewer supplies, or mason's tools. Dwarves get something called Stone Cunning, which gives them a bonus on checks that are intelligence history for origins of stonework and things that maybe a dwarf would know more about. This tells you what languages you speak as well. As a dwarf, you can speak, read, and write Common and Dwarvish. And then you choose what subrace you want. And the races in D&D all have 2 subraces. I believe some may actually have more. But we are choosing Mountain Dwarf. We know that already. And then below that, it gives us what those traits are as well. Our ability score increased to our strength, which we've already added. And then it lets us know that we have Dwarven Armor Training, another cool name for we have proficiency with light and medium armor as a Mountain Dwarf.
Size is one of those things that rarely comes up in the game, but if it does come up and you do want to remember it, there's unfortunately not a spot on the character sheet proper for it. What you can do, though, is if you want to come down to this field here, Features and Traits, if you do want to put in size medium, you can do that. So as you fill out your character sheet, you can be using a pen and paper, or you could be using a digital PDF like we are. If you're using a pen and paper, you can jot down the name of the ability, a quick note, and maybe the page number. For example, my dwarf speed is not reduced by heavy armor. That's easy to remember, so I don't have to put any sort of reference. But for something like dark vision, where I might not know exactly what that means, another tip is if you're writing this by hand, you can type in dark vision and then in parentheses, put a page number. Now, I'm specifically looking at the basic rules. So for me, that page number would be 15. And right over here, I can see that I have dark vision. So I would just write in page 15. That helps me not have to write by hand everything here. If you are doing this digitally, though, another great trick is to actually click over, take the full ability, right-click it, hit copy. Now, go back to your character sheet. Here in the features and traits box, I can click, right-click, select paste, and there's all of dark vision. Now you might be saying, well, that's going to be way too big. No, it won't. As we start filling in this box, this text will automatically shrink, so you don't have to worry about that. Either way, both ways work. Just write down what you need to build your character. We'll probably continue to cut and paste in this video just for the sake of simplicity. All right, so next we're going to jump into class. The same way that we just did race and subrace, there's kind of a long list of things that we need to put on this character sheet. Don't feel like it's daunting and too much. It's really just copying things over. Jeff, why don't you walk us through what is in the class that needs to go on the sheet?
So the first thing that we're going to fill out here is our hit points. So as a fighter, our hit dice is 1d10. Basically what that means is as we, level up, we'll have a d10 worth of hit points per level that'll determine how much hit points we get, and you can use them for things like resting, which we'll cover leveling up and resting and hit dice and all those sorts of things in much more detail later in the series. But as far as character creation specifically, the part that we want to look at is hit points at first level. So that'll always be whatever your hit dice is, your hit points at first level will always be the maximum number of that. So for our fighter, we have a d10 hit dice. So we'll have a base of 10 hit points to start with, plus your constitution modifier. We have a +3 to our constitution modifier based off of all the hit points based on all the attributes and the racial stuff that we added in before. So we'll have starting hit points at level 1 of 13, which is pretty high for a first level character. And the hit dice will be different across all the different classes, so if you're not making a fighter, just make sure you double check what that number is. It'll either be a d6, a d8, a d10, or a d12, depending on the class. So the next thing on our class list then is going to be proficiencies. So we'll have a nice handful of different things that we'll get from being a fighter. The first thing on the list here is armor proficiencies. So as a fighter, I can use light armor, medium armor, heavy armor, and shields, which is basically all armor that is in the game. That's all the different types of armor. So as a fighter, I can wear whatever type of armor that I want as long as I meet the prerequisites for that equipment, which we can talk about later. We also get weapon proficiencies, so simple weapons and martial weapons. So similarly, as a fighter, that means I can use any weapon I'll be considered proficient with. That's when it gives you just these big categories like that. That means any equipment that falls under that category, you can use any of them, and simple and martial weapons are the only categories. So that means as a fighter, any armor, any weapon that I want, I'll be proficient in, and I'll know that I can use them and benefit from them. As a fighter, you do not get any specific tool proficiencies. Other classes do have something that they can get there, so just make sure that you take a look depending on what class that you're picking. And then saving throws, I'll have strength and constitution, which will make me proficient in those specific saving throws. And then we have skills. So for a fighter, we can pick 2 skills from any of these lists. So there's acrobatics, animal handling, athletics, history, insight, intimidation, perception, and survival. So when it comes to skill proficiencies and choosing which ones that you want, one quick thing that I'm going to note, as Tim and James mentioned earlier in the video, as an experienced character creator, you can start to kind of do different things out of order once you sort of get a sense of where things are at. So something that we're going to be talking about more later with this character is their background. I happen to know that we're going to be choosing the soldier background for this character, and that will also get you skill proficiencies. So it might be helpful to take a look at what background you might want to pick and see what proficiencies that background gives you. So that way when you're picking skills from this list, you can pick different skills than the ones that your background would have given you to get a wider array of options and proficiencies that you'll have available. So I happen to know that the soldier background gives athletics and intimidation as the skill proficiencies for it. So those are both options on this list here, and you could take them if you were having a different background. But because I know that's what we'll be picking, I'm going to not pick those here because I know I'll already have those covered later. But it's something just to take a look at as you make your character. So because I know athletics, would be the one that I would go for first as a fighter, I know I'll already have that, so I don't need to pick that, and same with intimidation. So I am going to instead get perception, because it's just a general useful skill in 5e. A lot of perception checks generally happen in the games. And then I'm also going to take survival, which I think might be useful as well. So I'll add those 2 skill proficiencies to the character sheet, and then we'll be all set with our proficiencies. So, just a quick note as far as filling out this character sheet. You'll notice as we've entered in all these proficiencies and the saving throws and the skills that we've picked, that we've bubbled in the column that marks it as proficient. That's what that bubble indicates. Now, you'll notice there's also a box there that's blank, which is where you would add in exactly what the die roll modifier that you would add in total would be. Now that'll involve your proficiency bonus like we covered way back in the core rule video. And we're going to talk about proficiency bonus in just a little bit and kind of where you see that. It does come from your class and your level. So as you get to that point, we'll fill in all those numbers as well. So you'll see them blank for now. Just know that we will be filling in the specific values soon.
All right, so the next thing we're looking at is equipment. Now, equipment is kind of interesting because it is going to be the weapons that you're using to start with. It's usually going to be some of the other little equipment pieces like torches, and there's a lot of different options here. And so it can be confusing when you're making a character because not only do they give you options, like you get a choice to kind of go shopping, but the equipment isn't listed anywhere in this section. So the way that I like to fill out my character sheet is I like to take and copy and paste or write what I get, and then I kind of go shopping, so to speak. So for you, you're just starting out. You might not know, for example, the last bullet point on this list, it says A, a Dungeoneer's pack, or B, an Explorer's pack. Well, what's in those? That's in the equipment section. So the way that I would do it is I would probably copy and paste this whole list over into my equipment, and then I would delete what I don't take. Now, this might seem confusing at first, but it's actually easier because what you're going to do, since you have to jump to a totally different section of the basic rules or a totally different section of your book, that allows you to be looking at your character sheet and kind of see what you're choosing from. And then, again, it's important that you delete the things you don't choose. So I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to take all of these things right here, jump over to the sheet, and then you see down here, there's this nice spot here for equipment. I'm going to just paste it all in here. Now, I have A or B. All right, so now let's jump over to the equipment section. We're going to use the starting equipment. There are other ways that you can do things. You can actually generate how much money you have and go shopping, but for the sake of ease, we're going to go ahead and go to our list of equipment here.
Another thing about the list of equipment that you see inside of each class is that often they set up one or another type of playstyle. For example, for the fighter, you can do chainmail or leather armor and a longbow. You can also do a martial weapon and a shield, or two martial weapons, right? So a little bit more defensive with the shield, or two weapon fighting. And sometimes those things tie into the decisions you make later. So it's worth at least looking at this section to get an idea of what you should choose, even if you're going to do the shopping method.
So if I look at my character sheet, we either get to start with chainmail or leather armor. So I can come here and look. Chainmail is here under heavy armor, and you kind of just got to look. And if I wanted the leather armor, I could look up here and find leather. So essentially, I'm just looking at what I want. Now, we decided we're going to go, sort of a heavy fighter. I want chainmail because I can look across. I can see all the benefits here. I have this strength prerequisite. It does give me disadvantage on stealth, so that's something you might want to write into your character sheet. But go ahead and take a look here. I have my chainmail here. It's going to give me an armor class of 16, so I'll just go over here. I'm not taking the longbow, the 20 arrows, or the leather armor, so I'm going to just delete this, and then make sure that I put the properties on the character sheet. The armor class is up here.
So another thing to note when choosing the equipment here is that it can also call back towards the choices that you made earlier. So if you remember when we were looking at the quick build for the fighter, it recommended either strength or dexterity be your highest stat. Now, we ended up going strength because we wanted to be up close, to use melee weapons, things like that. That was kind of our vision for this fighter. So that made more sense. And that's also why we're choosing chainmail, because it gives you a flat armor class. It doesn't care about your dexterity. We have a lot of benefits as a dwarf to let us use heavy armor very effectively. And it just kind of makes a lot of sense for the stats that we chose. Now, if we had decided to go with a dexterity-based fighter instead of a strength-based fighter, Leather armor would make a lot more sense because leather armor lets you add your dexterity modifier to your armor class, or at least a part of it. Longbow also uses dexterity as its main stat, so those sorts of benefits and those sorts of stats can affect what equipment you should probably lean towards. So because we went strength, chainmail makes a lot of sense for us. If we went dexterity instead, then other options might be better suited to that character. So just keep in mind as you're picking these different equipments, that which stat that you chose does kind of factor into not what choices you have to make. You can pick whichever you want to, but in terms of using the mechanics as effectively as you can, just use those stats as a guide towards where you lean. And the equipment will tell you which stat it uses and all those sorts of things as you read through that section more in depth.
And if the table isn't enough, all of the armor has a longer description that gives you a lot more information as well. So next on our equipment list, I can either choose a martial weapon and a shield, or 2 martial weapons, as James had mentioned. So a martial weapon and a shield is the way we're going to go. So if we find our weapon chart here, everything's categorized. Simple melee weapons, simple ranged weapons. Now, we want a martial weapon because we get one. And since strength is our main stat, we want to go with a melee weapon because strength factors into how hard you hit melee. So we get to choose a martial melee weapon from this list. Now you'll notice there's a column over here that says properties. There's also damage. You can ignore the cost for now because this comes included with your starting equipment package. The weight doesn't really matter as much for the moment. So for these properties, because I know that we're going to be using a shield, I just need to make sure that I'm choosing one that is one-handed. So what I'll do is probably just we're going to choose a longsword. And the reason is because, well, first of all, it's a classic fantasy weapon. But second of all, this has a cool property called versatile, which basically means that if I do happen to want to use it two-handed, I can, and I get to roll in a higher damage die. So if my shield gets knocked loose or destroyed, I get to use my sword with both hands and get to do a little more damage. That really keeps it versatile, just like the name says. All right, so I've chosen my longsword, right? So what I need to remember here is that it is 1d8 slashing, and it is versatile. I just need to add that to my character sheet. I'm going to do that in 2 steps here. First, I'm going to come over here. I want to change a martial weapon to be my longsword that I chose. Okay. So now I need to add my longsword to my character sheet. Now there are a couple of different things that are important here. It's got the damage as well as the versatile property. This is the first time we're going to add a weapon to the character sheet. So now I come over here, and again, I get to choose either a martial weapon and a shield or 2 martial weapons. Well, I know I'm going to choose a longsword, so I'm going to replace a martial weapon with longsword. And then I need to delete option B here because we're not going to use that. Now, it's important that while we're here, we go ahead and put what a longsword is in terms of our attack right on the character sheet. So above here in this box, I get to write those different things. All right, so remember that the chainmail, it tells us here in this column the armor class or the AC, which is a 16. So this is pretty simple. You know, I already put it down here in my list. I just need to put the armor class here, like that. Now remember the longsword here, as we mentioned, it does 1d8 slashing and it is versatile, which can do a d10 if I use it with 2 hands. So where do I put this on my character sheet? We already dropped it down here in my list. So I have a longsword and a shield. Well, for the first time, we're going to use this attacks and spell casting box above. So I know I have a longsword in my equipment, But because it's a weapon, I need to figure out the damage it does, the name of it, as well as list somewhere that it's versatile.
So just like we did before with the saving throws and skill specific blank boxes that we have there for all the numbers, we're going to do the same thing with the attack bonus because we get that number the same way that we're going to get those numbers. So just know that we are getting to that. We're leaving it blank on purpose for now, but we will be covering that in just a little bit.
So, for the name here, what they're talking about is your attack name. Now, in this case, I'm going to put longsword, right? As Jeff mentioned, we're going to skip the attack bonus. Now, there's damage and attack type. So, here on longsword, it's 1d8 slashing, okay? So if you look, it tells you the damage you do. It's going to have a die and then a type. This is 1d8 slashing, and it's a versatile d10. So, we're going to go here. 1d8 slashing. And then I'm actually going to put a little asterisk right here. And the reason why I'm going to put that asterisk is because I need to put that it's versatile. And this is kind of a tiny little box. So just down here, and not all weapons are going to have these notes, but just like anything else, you want to just write it on the character sheet so you have it. My asterisk is going to say versatile. And then I'm going to type in a D10 when used two-handed. That just reminds me that if I'm using it with two hands, I get to use this D10. All right, now we're back to the armor section because on my list, as I'm chopping it down, it's a longsword and a shield. Now, what does that mean? Well, I have to go back to the shield, and it's under armor. Now, in old editions of Dungeons & Dragons, there were different kinds of shields. This is way easier. There's just shield. You list shield, it gives you an armor class bump. Notice, very simple. It just says +2. So, our favorite way to do it is in your armor class, just put a little slash here that factors in the +2. So rather than put a +2 or write my shield down in my equipment or anything like that, just put a little slash and then an 18. And that just means that when I have my shield in my hand, my armor class is 18. When I don't, it's a 16 because it's just counting my chainmail. Now, kind of working our way back down through the equipment here. It's a light crossbow or 2 hand axes. These are basically just, ranged weapons. Then you also get a Dungeoneer's pack or an Explorer's pack. All right, so working our way down the equipment list, you basically get an option of some ranged weapons. We're going to choose hand axes. Why? Well, if you look at the list, it's because they use strength. So, boom, hand axes. Now, hand axes are ranged weapons, and so you'll see there's a range band here. We're not going to go into details. You just need to remember what it is. So in the same way that we did versatile, you can just put ranged and then put your little note there. Here. Finally, it gives you a choice between an equipment pack. These are really just trinket equipment. They're fun and they're neat. I'm just going to choose Explorer's Pack because we're not going to do much dungeon diving. If you want to see what is in these packs, in the player's handbook and the basic rules here, there is a list. So for me, I'm just going to take all the contents of the Explorer's Pack right here, hit copy, and then right after it, hit colon, and then hit paste. If you want to kind of go into all the details there, you can look and read and have some fun doing that. But that's it. We're done with our equipment.
So next, we want to find our proficiency bonus and the features that our class, the fighter, gets. So if we go back a little bit before the class features, in each one of the classes, there is a table that tells you what you get. So if we look at the fighter, it has our first level, We get a proficiency bonus of +2, which we're going to set aside for now and handle in a little bit, and you'll see why. And then we get 2 features. We get to pick a fighting style, and then we get something called Second Wind. So like I said, each class has this, and as you level up, it tells you each thing you get. But because we're just making a first level character, we're just going to focus on that first part, and we're going to pick our fighting style, and we're going to figure out what Second Wind is. So as for the fighting style for our fighter, you have a lot of different options. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but depending on what build you've gone with so far will decide what you're picking here to some degree. For example, archery, you get +2 bonus to attack rolls with ranged weapons. Well, we have a sword and shield. We do have a ranged weapon, but we probably want to lean into the sword and shield a little more. So you look through these and see which one you think sort of matches what you want to do. But we're going to go ahead and pick dueling because we like that. The +2 bonus to damage rolls with a single melee weapon is really cool. So we're going to go with that one. And the next thing that chart said was that we got Second Wind. And so you'll go ahead and copy what Second Wind says to your character sheet. You'll see that there are a lot more class features here. And like I said, you'll get those as you level up. So as you increase, you can read ahead to see what other things your fighter will be able to do. But for now, you have your fighting style and that Second Wind at first level.
Now, class features are going to be used very frequently. So this is a matter of taste. In the same way over here with the ability scores, how you can put the score and the modifier in either box. In the same way, I prefer to put it here at the top of my description. So when I put Second Wind in here and any other class features, I put it at the top just because I want to see it. It's something I'm probably going to be using in combat quite a bit. And so that is where I like to put mine, right here at the top, so that I can refer to it when we're in combat. Put a little space here, maybe even some dotted lines, something like that.
All right, so the last thing that we'll need to settle in before we get into all those blank boxes that we were talking about before is to wrap up our background options that we get. So as you mentioned earlier in the video, we're picking the soldier background. So that will get us a couple options. So the skill proficiencies for the backgrounds are set, where the class you had a list to pick a couple things from. The backgrounds, they just give you 2 straight up. So as you mentioned before, that's athletics and intimidation. So we factored that in when we picked our fighter skills earlier, but here we are seeing them now. So that'll go onto our character sheet as well. We will get a tool proficiency, 1 type of gaming set, and then also land vehicles. And then we also get a couple pieces of equipment. Now the equipment for the backgrounds is usually a lot more sort of just trinket, cool role-playing options. So we get like insignia of rank, a set of bone dice, some cards, and some stuff like that. We'll also get 10 gold pieces as part of this background, and all the different backgrounds will have different monetary values and different equipment and things like that they'll give you. One other thing that each background gives you is a special feature. So for the soldier, we have military rank. Basically, because you used to be a military soldier, other soldiers loyal to your organization recognize your authority and influence, and you can basically use your soldier background to help other soldiers who are, sympathetic to your cause or your associations, help with accommodations and equipment and things like that. So it's just like a little trinket effect where, because you used to be a soldier, you get along well with other soldiers and they'll be more likely to help you and so on. And each background's feature has a different little effect like this that they'll get access to.
Now you notice here as I paste these, sometimes the spacing isn't 100% correct. It's fine. You can just kind of just come in here and hit backspace so that it's clear to you. Add your own spaces or, again, little dots, little hashes, things like that. Now, every background comes with some really cool role-playing options. You can roll for these options. You can actually choose from the list. And the soldier in particular has one called a specialty. Now, basically, you can choose, whether you're an officer, scout, whether you're a quartermaster, standard bearer. And then every background has a trait, so a personality trait, an ideal, a bond, and a flaw. We're not going to roll for these. So I'm literally going to just choose the first one from each table. Number 1, because it can be really interesting for role play to just randomly choose things and then figure it out as I play. But number 2, just to save a little bit of time as we fill out the character sheet.
So the thing about backgrounds is they supply you with some things, and some parts of them are pretty important, like the skill proficiencies you get or the languages and the equipment. The rest of it, though, is really up to you to customize. You can choose some of them, and they give you some really good templates. But as long as you remember that the traits, bonds, flaws, and ideals aren't extremely mechanical things inside the world, you can realize that there are so many options you can choose that can form your character and who they're going to be without you having to worry about things like balance or something like that. This is what allows you to choose almost any of the traits or ideals or bonds or flaws from any of the backgrounds and kind of mix and match. This is really somewhere where you can kind of go wild, choosing any of the options available to you, or work with your GM to come up with one more specific. Or maybe you're playing in a world and you want to be an acolyte of a very specific type of organization in that. There's so much room for customization here on a lot of the things that have very little mechanical changes. And this allows you to really customize what you can do with your character.
Finally, as you get more and more in tune with what the background provides, there's also a section that talks about customizing some of the other mechanical parts of the background as well. Work with your game master or your dungeon master, but as you see here, you can customize a background by literally replacing one feature with another one, or choosing any two skills, different tool proficiencies, or languages. Read this section carefully. This can help if you chose a class that gave you some skills or a tool proficiency and you don't want overlap. You can even tweak some of those minor things. So just bear that in mind, but get your approval from your game master.
So we have made all our important decisions. We've gotten all our important abilities and proficiency bonuses and everything like that. So we just have to fill out all these last couple boxes here and figure out what all these different numbers actually are. So, as James mentioned earlier, there was a chart at the top of the fighter screen that had all the proficiency bonuses per level. We're level 1, so our proficiency bonus is 2. So we'll go ahead and get that added into our sheet as well. And that'll give us everything that we need to figure out all the rest of these numbers. So as we mentioned before, we have all these blank boxes and saving throws and skills and attack bonuses and the equipment and all that sort of thing. Here's how we figure out what exactly those numbers are. So to figure out what these numbers are, you take the ability that the saving throw or skill references. The saving throws, they say it right there. In the skills, it'll be in parentheses right next to it. And then you add your proficiency bonus if you are proficient in those skills. Now, we should have all those marked and bubbled off here for the saving throws and skills, and be able to tell all that from there. So we'll just start going through them one by one. I'm not going to do every single one. I'm just going to give a couple examples here, and then you can sort of fill it out from there. But for this first one, strength saving throw, we'll take our +3 that we have from our strength modifier, and then we'll add our proficiency bonus, because we're proficient in strength saving throws, and add another +2 to that. So that would be a +5 total for the strength saving throw, which means that anytime you roll a strength saving throw, you roll your d20, and then you add your +5, and then that'll be your total final roll. And then you can just kind of go through and check. So dexterity, we're not proficient in dexterity saving throws, so we would only add our ability modifier and not our proficiency bonus. So that would be a +1 to our dexterity saving throw. We're proficient in constitution, so that would be +3 from constitution modifier, +2, so another +5. And then sort of jumping down into some of the skills. These all just follow the exact same process. So acrobatics, we're not proficient in, so it would just be our dexterity modifier, +1. Whereas if we jump down to athletics, that would be strength. So just like our strength saving throw, that would be a +5. And then the next one down, deception, would use our charisma, which is just 0. We're not proficient in that, so that would just be a total 0. So if we rolled a d20, you just take whatever number you get on the d20. You don't add or subtract anything for that one. And you can just sort of go through adding in the different ones. If you have the bubble checked off for proficiency, you'll add the proficiency and the ability modifier. Otherwise, just the ability modifier. And you can get all these skills and saving throw boxes filled in. One thing to add as we're getting in all these numbers filled in here on the screen is that, as we can see, our intelligence modifier is a -1. So that means whenever we go through one of these things that we do actually subtract that from the total roll. So if we look at a skill like investigation, then that would be our ability modifier, -1, and we're not proficient, so we don't add anything there. So our rolls to investigation would be -1. So we'd roll the d20, subtract 1 from the total result to get our final total. Now this can get a little bit weird with the math if you are proficient in a skill that you have the -1 in. I don't think we have any on this character sheet here, but if we were, say, proficient in investigation, we'd have that -1, and then we'd add the +2 from the proficiency bonus if we had it, and we'd have a total of +1 instead of -1. It can be a little strange with the math sometimes like that, but as long as you just take the minus and the proficiency bonus and add them all together, to get that final number, that'll be the final number that you put in, whether it's positive, negative, or 0.
So some of the things on the character sheet we put in because we knew they wouldn't change. Some things we even put in and knew that they would change, and certain things we didn't fill in at all until just now. And hopefully watching the video, you can see that. But in some cases, it's easier to record an amount. Say you get a +2 to your damage. You want to record that when you get your class feature, but something else may change it later. But any of those things with the little dots on the boxes, your proficiencies, your skills and your saving throws, we save those because any change to some of the numbers will require, erasing a good portion of those to redo them. And we want to avoid that. So if it seemed like we jumped around and did it in a weird way, everything we did was somewhat deliberate. You can do it however you want, but we tried to do it in a way that meant the least amount of erasing and going back as possible.
So, now that we have all our ability scores and skills and saving throw numbers added in here and calculated, one quick note that I did want to add is that as your character levels up, your proficiency bonus will start to change and increase, and your ability scores can increase sometimes too. Now, if that does happen, as you update these numbers on your character sheet, you'll want to make sure that you keep all the numbers updated. So if my proficiency bonus increases for my character overall, anything that I'm proficient in, I'll need to make sure that I update that number as well. Doesn't matter right now to start at level 1, but just keep in mind that as you start to level up, some of those numbers might start to change. So we'll want to make sure that you have some space to modify them and increase them as your character grows. And we do just have a couple more boxes here to fill out. These are all things that are derived from everything else that we've already decided. So we have initiative. What our initiative is just our dexterity modifier. Just plain and simple, whatever you have in the dexterity modifier, you put in the initiative box. There are specific features that you can pick for like feats and things like that can increase that number and change that, but unless you've picked that specific thing, that doesn't matter to right now. Initiative is just exactly the same as your dexterity modifier. And we also have down here at the bottom, passive wisdom, perception. So this is a bit of a strange one. Exactly when and how you use that is something that we'll cover later. But just to get that number filled in here, the way that you figure out what that is you take just the number 10 base flat, and then you'll add whatever your perception bonus total is. So for us, we have a +3 in perception. So our passive wisdom, we take that base 10 and add 3. So our passive wisdom would be 13.
Passive wisdom is something that we're going to talk a lot more about when we get into things like combat and the exploration part of using this character sheet. But just know that it basically means your wisdom score as though you're always rolling without having to roll. So it's your basic level of this skill without ever having to roll for it. We'll explain that way more in detail, but that's what the number means.
So we just have one last little section here to fill out, and that's going to be our attack bonus and damage. So the way that you tell what your attack bonus is very similar to the way that we did saving throws and skills. So the different weapons will either use strength or dexterity, and that depends on what type of weapon it is. On average, melee weapons will use strength, and ranged weapons will use dexterity. There are circumstances where that's not exactly the case. For example, a finesse weapon, like a dagger or a short sword, you can use either dexterity or strength, your choice. And same with like throwing weapons, like hand axes, like we have. Also, you can pick strength or dexterity. But in general, melee will be strength, ranged will be dexterity. So we'll be going through our thing here. And in the same way that we got our, strength saving throws or strength skills, we'll add our attack bonus here like that. So we'll take our strength modifier, which is +3. for our longsword. Because we're proficient in all martial weapons, and a longsword counts as that, we are proficient as well. So just like before, we'll add our proficiency bonus. So it'll be the +3 plus the +2 for a total attack bonus of +5. That means if we use our weapon to attack somebody, we'll roll that d20, we'll add that +5, and that'll be our total number. And then the last little thing to add in here as well is going to be our damage. So we'll talk all about these numbers a lot more when we talk about combat. That's what these numbers are used for almost exclusively. But just know that your damage, you'll also add your ability score modifier, but not your proficiency bonus, to the same type of damage that you did. So, for example, our longsword attack bonus uses strength. So, because we have a +3 in strength, we'll also add +3 to our damage as well. Now, this will add with our dueling fighting style that we picked before, which means that if we were to roll damage, we would roll 1d8 +3 for the strength, +2 for dueling fighting style, for a total of +5 to damage. So dueling specifically says that you have to be using a melee weapon, so the hand axe will be slightly different. For the damage for the hand axe, it'll only be plussing our regular strength modifier when we throw it. So that will just be 1d6 +3. We won't add the +2 from dueling because a hand axe is not a melee weapon while we're throwing it. Now, this does get a little specific, and again, we'll talk about a lot of this way more in detail in the combat. But if you were using the hand axe as a melee weapon, it would be +5 instead of +3, whereas if you're throwing it, it would only be +3. That comes down to a lot of the specific combat terminology, which we'll cover more specifically later. Just a little detail that's worth pointing out right now.
A lot of these things you don't have to memorize, you just have to know them when you put it on the character sheet. So like Jeff said, a hand axe uses that +3, specifically because it's using your strength. It's a thrown weapon, whereas a lot of the bows and crossbows and things like that are going to use dexterity because it's not about how hard you throw an axe, it's about shooting a bow. So just remember, notate it, look at the weapon charts, look at the equipment charts. You kind of only have to do it once. As long as you write it down on the character sheet correctly, it's the only time you'll ever have to remember it. All the other times, you're just going to be referring to it. All right, so as we round things up, if you want to fill out the very top here, of course you can. So while I do that, I'm going to talk about, hey, what happens if you are not playing a fighter? Well, that can be something that's a little problematic because there's a lot more to the character creation. Now, we will do more character creation videos at a quicker pace for other classes. So maybe that's a good thing to put in the comments below. Is there a class that you would like to see us actually go through and build for one of our upcoming videos? Now, like I said, and we're going to go quicker, so we're not going to explain point by point why we're doing everything, but we will show you, okay, boom, 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 and go through. What class would you like to see? And maybe that's the one we'll do next. I know a lot of you have been talking about spellcasters specifically, but let us know. So we are Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, and tabletop games. In this case, teaching you how to fill out a character sheet. If you like these kinds of videos, if you're liking the Learn to Play series or some of our other videos, be sure to subscribe. And also hit the notification bell if you want to know when we post a new video. I think we end all videos with a Tabtarian toast, and this one should be no different.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Slancha. We got to name the character, and I think it's only fitting that it's Kirkus. Listen, he went from a life of lizard manning to a life of adventuring. He was a level 10 lizard man, and now he's a level 1 fighter with 0 XP.
And he also turned into a dwarf. So.
And hey, Maybe he's doing like a Men in Black, where he's in a dwarf suit. I want sugar water. It's a lizard man in a dwarf suit.
So Vince D'Onofrio is Kirk is the lizard man. This summer in 0XP, a hero's journey.
What is a lizard anyway?